right now. First time that Josh has visited with us. I hope it's not the last. You can follow him on Twitter at LateKickJosh. Got some really, really good stuff that you can find online. He hosts a show called Late Kick Live. There's also a podcast with that, and sometimes has some strong takes on college football. Josh, thanks for spending a few minutes with us. What's up?
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me, man. I'm one of those people who doesn't really believe in that whole off-season thing, so I'm having fun watching everyone else come back to the table, and I've just been sitting here the whole time.
I hear you. I tend to agree with that. I want to ask you specifically. So you talked a few weeks ago. Borky, give me the exact wording so I don't mess this up. Because you were talking about Ole Miss, and I think chaos maybe was the right phrase. And then with your SEC rankings, you had them at the bottom of the SEC West. I guess I'm just trying to make those two things. Tell me what you think about this Ole Miss team.
Oh, yeah, it can be very confusing when you listen to me. I really caution against doing too much of it. So there's a lot of what we do on the show in terms of prediction that's model-based. And so a lot of times I'll have a computer model spitting things out. And anytime I put out a record or anything like that, I'm just going to go with what that model says. So the model, for example, has Ole Miss rated 21st in the country, yet has them going 6-6 this year. So make of that what you will. I think probably what it sees is, well, let me rephrase. I don't think that a lot of the predictive modeling out there in college football right now fully knows how to interpret the transfer portal era, because we've never had an era where you can do what Ole Miss just did. Southern Cal is another team that, for all I know, we're really struggling to interpret. So it looks at it and it sees vacated spots, and it's applying some standard deviation to what normally would be a replacement. But you and I both know, the listeners know, these aren't normal replacements. So that's one area where I think the computer may be a little bit lower on Ole Miss than my own gut is. So what I expect from them is a fast start. The schedule sets up perfectly. I expect that by the time their schedule starts to push back on them a little bit, that's that Kentucky game, and then obviously the back half of the season, they will have figured out whatever they are. And at that point, we'll just be asking ourselves how high level a team this is. And the level of play this year, I don't expect to be what it was last year. I think Matt Corral is a very, very important piece. I do think that coaching staff and the pieces they lost probably is undervalued a little bit nationally. The closer you get to the program, the more vital those pieces were. So I don't expect this Ole Miss to match last year's output. I do think our model may be a little bit lower on them than they should be. So kind of a happy medium there.
That's fair. You may have heard the audible gasp in the background. That was Brian Haydad, who was angry with me because it was Mississippi State who you had as a chaos team. So I'll kind of go same question. When you look at this Mississippi State team with Will Rogers returning, with what they've got on defense, and a team that a lot of people are kind of looking past or undervaluing, what do you see with Mike Leach's ball club?
Well, my feel on them is if I were to put LSU jerseys on them, they would be considered a dark horse. Okay. I think a lot of people are failing to buy into them just because it's Mississippi State, and they simply cannot sell themselves on State ever doing anything of note in the SEC West, given the current setup, which is fair. But I don't look at teams that way. Teams are just numbers to me. And so, I mean, it sounds kind of heartless and cold, but that's the way it is when you're trying to model things. And if for instance, that little computer model I'm talking about has State rated a couple of spots even ahead of where Ole Miss is, which I don't think you would find in national polls, but it really likes them. And I also think that it'll be interesting to see, for example, when they play LSU early in the year. LSU is going to be a good early barometer for them. Both of them will be good barometers for each other, honestly, because I'm hearing a lot of good things from LSU about how they feel about their corners. But there are some folks in the scouting world who aren't sold on it, who have been through there. And I don't think LSU is going to be tested at that position against Florida State. I don't think they'll be tested at that position against Southern. But Mike Leach and Mississippi State absolutely will test them. And I think that may be one of those first early season wake-up calls in the SEC. If they're able to go in there and pull that off, all of a sudden I think a lot of folks then come to that Mississippi State party I also think that a lot of people have rightfully noticed how tough their schedule is. But if you dive really deep into that schedule, you realize as tough a stretch as Mississippi State has, they actually hold the individual schedule dynamic advantage in a lot of those games. They play A&M, for example, and A&M's got them sandwiched between a date against Arkansas and a date against Alabama. And there's a lot of that stuff where, even when Georgia comes in there, it's during a string of tough games for Georgia. So it's not like Mississippi State's out on an island up against the wall with their schedule. There are a lot of their opponents that'll be up against the wall, too. So I think they could surprise some people. I had them winning 8 games this year.
Josh Pate visiting with us, 24/7 Sports. You can follow him on Twitter at Late Kick Josh. He is the host of Late Kick Live. Cool podcast, video stream, all of that rolled into one that you can check out. And Josh makes you think. I mean, if even if you don't agree with him, he makes you think. So I want you to, and I'm kind of going off of some of the interaction on your Twitter feed. You're not going to spend a ton of time talking about the college football playoff until we get to the college football playoff. Are you against the idea of growing the field, or kind of somewhere in the middle on that?
No, I'm against it. I would love to retract. I would love to hit the rewind button and go back to the days of the BCS or before that. And I always get sometimes I get pushback on that, but it's only because I just feel a different way about the sport entirely. I watch pro sports, okay? I watch Major League Baseball, I watch the NFL, I watch the NBA, so I get the concept of a regular season building towards an expanded postseason and everything based on crowning a champion in that year. I've always looked at college football differently. So I've never felt like our sport has to sync up congruent to all the other pro sports. I don't think it's constructed to work that way. And if you want to crown a national champion, that's fine. I've always looked at the sport and said, the 12 Saturdays you give me in the fall, that's my nucleus. And if you want anything else on it, that's satellites around it for me. So when the college football playoff comes along back in 2014, I was excited about it like everyone else was. But what we noticed is we had some unforeseen ramifications. And then you get the opt-out era, for example. Yeah. And what aggravates me a lot is also the way the whole thing's been marketed. And that's mainly due to who owns that property currently. But the way it's been marketed is such that there's almost a hop, skip, and a jump over those 12 weeks, and everything is focused on playoff ramification. And the whole thing my whole take on it is, even if you expand it, what has aggravated me to no end is the people who created the mess are then the ones yelling, well, let's do more of what created the mess so we can clean up the mess. And that's never worked that way in history. So I've got a lot of very wide-ranging thoughts. I am not a believer, for example, that it will even out recruiting at all. I am not a believer that it will add more emphasis to more games and create a more compelling November, because in the aggregate, you take away ramifications in games that feature the only teams that have a shot at winning it. You know, that Ohio State-Michigan game has a safety net under it now. Alabama games in the few years where they've been kept out, they're in now. And those are the teams that can actually win it. So you're putting ramifications on games featuring teams trying to lock down an 11 or 12 seed. They're going to get blasted once they get in. And after a few years, your mind will be trained to understand that, I thought these November games where these 2 and 3 loss teams playing each other for a spot in the playoff were going to be good. But now that I know they have no shot once they get there, it really doesn't feel the same.
You know, the only real pushback I would give you is, to me, the thing that is hurting college football right now is that there's so few teams that have a chance, not to win a national championship. I mean, I don't think that changes, but to be a part of the playoff. And it feels like bringing more fan bases and more people in across the country would be helpful for the sport. I think that's the only real pushback I'd give you on that.
Yeah, here's my counter to that. My counter is we had that. We already had a feeling in college football where it was kind of accepted that there were tiers. There were the teams that could, win it all every year. But there were other teams. Like, I vividly remember in the pre-playoff era, I vividly remember many teams talking about how big an accomplishment it would be if we got into 8-win club. And then there's that 10-win club. And so there were tiers, and therefore I could go watch Georgia Tech Wake Forest on a mid-November afternoon, and those folks were excited because they weren't predicted to be a bowl team, and all of a sudden they're on the precipice of 6 wins. And then you get into the playoff era, and it sucks all of that oxygen out of the room to where now the only way that you can play a quote-unquote meaningful November game is if this sticker is attached to it and it has playoff ramifications, which has always been foolish to me. But I understand the differing points of view. It's just the way I feel about it.
Yeah, great insight. Thanks for some time. Hope we can catch up again soon, Josh.